You are listening to Eye of the Triangle, WKNC's weekly public affairs program from the campus of North Carolina State University in Raleigh. Any views and opinions expressed during Eye of the Triangle do not represent NC State or student media.
My name is Breyton Hill, and I'm here today with Dr. Kasey Wagoner. Dr. Wagoner is an assistant professor here at NC State, so welcome to WKNC.
Thanks for having me. It's very, very fun to see the inside of this place.
Yeah. So I introduced you as a professor at NC State, but how else would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think primarily I would introduce myself as a physicist. I really feel like physics, and I mean, I think this is true for any science discipline, but we get kind of pigeonholed into being like a researcher in this field or like a professor or whatever. But for a modern scientist, I think there's so much more to it than that. And there's so many different things that one can do and like identify with that. And so for me, core to my identity is being a physicist. In addition to that, you know, I like the biggest part of my life is my family. So I'm also a husband and a father and a lot of other things, but I think that's enough for now.
Yeah. What inspired you to get into the field of physics?
Yeah, that's great. So when I went to college at Eastern Illinois University, I actually started out studying accounting. And what had happened is when you start out studying any sort of business field, you have to go through a year or two before you can apply to be in the business college. And in that time, a large part of what you're doing is also taking your sort of general education courses. And so in my first year, I was taking some of these general education courses that included an astronomy course. And simultaneously, I was taking this sort of pre-business course on Excel. And so in my pre-business course, I was literally watching a dude just type in things to an Excel spreadsheet during class every day. So I would go from that to an astronomy course where the guy was talking about the stars and how the universe started and all this. And I would thought, like, these things are not the same for me. And so I would talk to the instructor after class. His name was Dr. Jim Conwell. And I would just talk to him about astronomy and that kind of stuff. And he convinced me that really, if you wanted to do that, there was no astronomy major at my school at EIU. But physics was really fundamental to all that. So I just kind of switched my major. And then since then, it was the best decision I've made. Certainly the best decision I've made professionally. It just like now I understand how physics plays a part in everything in our like universe. And taking physics courses and pursuing this as a profession has been like really awesome for me.
Yeah. Can you walk us through your career trajectory? So you studied business and then switched to physics. What happens next?
Yeah. So my career is like simultaneously like traditional for an academic and then also very non-traditional. After I finished my degree at EIU, it took me 4.5 years because my school was small enough where a lot of the upper level courses were only every 2 years. And so just switching to the major late meant that I was off track. It took me 4.5 years to finish my degree, which I think is important for people to know that like you don't have to like fit on a specific timeline. And then I started so I graduated in December, and then I started graduate school the following August. I took this little 8-month detour and worked on a carpentry crew, which was a great motivator to go back to graduate school. So then I went to graduate school at Washington University in St. Louis. I was there for 6 years and until I got my PhD. Graduate school was the hardest thing I ever did in a lot of ways, but also the most revolutionary experience for me in many, many ways. I had some of the craziest experiences of my life in very, very positive ways. I used to think that those experiences changed me, but I actually think now that those experiences helped me grow in a way to where I still think I'm the same person. It's just that I have a much bigger worldview. And that was all thanks to graduate school. So that was at Washington University in St. Louis. After I finished my PhD, I had some work that was unfinished and an exciting new avenue. And so I stayed there and did a postdoc in the same lab, but with a new experiment. The work that I did for my PhD and postdoc was building laboratory experiments to try to test some of the sort of fundamental tenets of general relativity, which is Einstein's theory of gravity.
Can I stop you right there? Can you explain what that means to a non-physicist?
Yeah. So in physics, physicists always try to do this thing where no matter how convoluted something is, they try to boil it down into the most fundamental principles. Okay. And so kind of right now in physics, there are two kind of foundations of all of physics, and they are all the stuff that makes up quantum mechanics, and then there's general relativity. And general relativity is basically like a very fancy description of how gravity works, the same gravity that we have here on Earth. But those two fundamental pillars don't seem to play well together. You can't boil them down further into one sort of unified thing right now. But that is the desire for physicists. And so in order to kind of combine general relativity and quantum mechanics together, one of them has to break, or something new has to be there. And so what we were trying to do was build experiments that kind of poke and prod at general relativity to see if there's something about it if there's more there below the surface that we don't yet know. And so that's what those experiments were doing. Nothing that we found or that anybody else has ever found has deviated from general relativity. So far it has seemed to be bulletproof, which is kind of amazing because it's, now 111 years old, and people have been testing it really, really severely over the course of that time, and it's really withstood every test. Yeah, it's crazy. And like some of this stuff you can pitch as all kinds of crazy things. Like literally my PhD experiment was looking for the manifestation of extra dimensions, which is like super, super cool. Now, if you came and watched me in the lab every day, you would not think that's what was happening, right? You'd just be like, that dude is turning levers and looking at a computer. But the end goal was to see if some of these extra dimensions that are hypothesized by things like string theory might actually manifest in a very well-designed and executed experiment in the lab.
And you found that it didn't?
That's right. That's what we found. And we were not the only ones doing this kind of experiment. So everybody else around the world, it's a very small sort of like subfield of physics, but everybody within that subfield has effectively found that their experiments are always consistent with exactly what general relativity would predict.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm clearly very biased. But then what happened was when I was in graduate school in my postdoc, in that time when I was at WashU, I realized that I really, really love physics. I really, really like being in a research environment, but I also realized how challenging research was. And at that time in my life, it felt like it was maybe a little bit more challenging than I wanted out of a career. Because if you're a researching scientist, at least a physicist doing, especially in that kind of work, you're really running into more problems than you can imagine, way more often than you're being successful at anything. And that just kind of beats you down. But because I liked all the other aspects of like physics and like research physics environments, I kind of tried to find a way where I could be in that environment without the pressure that comes with being a tenure track faculty, but also without the sort of constant drumbeat of like, this is really, really, really hard all the time. And so I made this sort of calculated choice to pursue a career as a teaching faculty member at a large institution. Simultaneously, in addition to doing this research, I was often a teaching assistant as a graduate student, and I was having a lot of success there. So, I was enjoying it, and it felt good to actually do something that I was like doing well at, as opposed to research where it was like having moderate success, but inherently like the experiments were telling me I was struggling. So I made this choice to pursue a teaching focused career. And then after I finished my postdoc, I got my first teaching faculty position also at WashU in St. Louis. And I did that for a few years, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and everything was really, really great. But simultaneously, at the same time, I was with my wife, and she had finished her PhD, and she got this really fantastic opportunity to go for a postdoc at Princeton University. And so we made this decision together to move from St. Louis to New Jersey. And so when we moved, my wife took her position, this really nice position at Princeton, and I went into a tenure track position at a very small school in Philadelphia named Philadelphia University. It was a tenure track position, but at a small school like that, tenure track positions are really very, very teaching focused. So I did that. I was liking it and enjoying it. But when I was there, during my first year there, Princeton actually contacted me and said that they had a teaching faculty position open for the following year. And so it was a bit of a hard decision because I gave up some security that came with a tenure track job at PhilAU, but I decided to move into a less secure teaching focused position at Princeton. And that was that was kind of for two reasons. One of them is it's very hard to say no to an elite physics department. If you have that opportunity, you just figure you don't get that many opportunities. But also that since that's where my wife was working, that meant that the logistics of our day-to-day life were much easier. We no longer would each have these horrible commutes in opposite directions. Rather, we could move closer to Princeton's campus and we could commute together, and life became much, much easier. So I made that move, and that was really, in the end, has turned out to be a fantastic experience. And I have a ton of amazing stories and experiences that I could tell you from that time. I was at Princeton as what was first called a lecturer, and then I got promoted to the position of senior lecturer. I was the first person ever from the outside of Princeton to come in and actually make that promotion within the physics department. And it was really, really a great experience. I really got to meet a lot of amazing people, amazing scientists, and have some just really phenomenal experiences for a physicist. So I was there, and then again, when my wife was a postdoc at that time, and when she was finishing her postdoc, she went on the job market. She just applied to, what felt like thousands of jobs across the world. And then she got offered a position at NC State. And then she said, hey, I've got this guy that's tagging along with me. Is there any chance that there is the opportunity for him to have a job? And at that time, the physics department actually realized that they could benefit from another teaching faculty. And so they said that, yeah, this is actually a very nice fit for us. And so then my wife and I made the transition from Princeton to NC State. We started in January of 2023. And I was a teaching faculty here from January of 2023 until August of 2026. And what happened is our college had this very interesting position became available where it was meant for somebody that does either education research or science outreach or science communication or science policy work. And it's a very non-traditional type of position for a tenure track faculty member. And so I applied for it and ended up getting it. And so in August of 2025, I transitioned from a teaching track to this position I'm currently in, which is assistant professor on the tenure track. And my group kind of focuses on, or we do, you might say we're unfocused. We do a lot of different things, but right now our kind of two main thrusts are working on understanding learning in the when a person goes to graduate school in physics, and then also looking at designing and executing outreach activities or informal science learning activities, and then studying the best way to approach those and what are the benefits of those kinds of learning environments. And then today I came here. So that's my trajectory.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. To kind of go off of that, physics can be quite the intimidating subject. So how do you work to make it not only accessible, but fun?
Yeah, that's a great question. So accessible is one thing and fun is another thing, and they're tied together, but I would like to approach them separately. First of all, let me talk about the fun. I think no matter where you are, whether you believe it or not, or whether or not you care about it, physics is 100% a part of everything. From the headphones that you're listening to the microphone that I'm speaking into, just actually how your brain processes the sound that's going into your brain right now. How is it turned from a sound wave that is this disruption of the air molecules? How does it turn it from that disruption of air molecules into an electrical signal that your brain can process? Physics is everywhere. And so I really believe that everybody likes something. And so if you like anything at all, then you could be intrigued by the physics that is underlying that subject. I was actually thinking about this as I was coming over here to the studio, okay, is there anything that doesn't have physics? And I think one could imagine the idea of philosophy, right? Where you're just thinking about everything in your own mind. But the moment that you go to communicate that to any other individual, to understand how that transmits, to really understand it, you need to know how we take a thought and turn it into a sound wave, and then how that sound wave travels from one's mouth to somebody else's ear. And right there's a ton of physics. And so it does not matter if you want to just like sit in the clouds and think about philosophy, or you actually want to play the drums, or you want to play sports. There's a ton of physics in that. And so I think that finding whoever I'm trying to communicate with, if I can find their natural thing that they like, then I hope can make the physics of that situation fun for them. Now, how do I make it relatable? That was another question. I think physicists on average, not everyone, but on average, physicists are really, really good at taking physical phenomena and turning them into math, right? And that is not relatable. But I think what I try to do is I try to actually give people a situation and try to explain it in terms of a physical intuition that they will have built from their earlier life. I can't always do it. It can be challenging for me, or challenging, I think, for anybody. But I think that trying to keep math out of things and rather focus on the intuition and just understanding physically what is happening in that situation, I think that is eminently understandable by everybody.
Speaking of fun things, you also explain the physics of sports with sports science. What is that?
Yeah. Well, so again, part of what I left out, I started my trajectory, or this discussion started my trajectory when I was an undergraduate. But what I didn't talk about was actually what I did as a child and up until that point. And that was sports. That's it. When I was in high school, I literally remember sitting very vividly one day in my high school calculus class, just looking out the window. And my teacher said, "What are you doing?" And I just said, "I'm looking out the window thinking about baseball. That's what I'm doing," right? And that was my life. And even through most of my undergraduate years, more of my time was spent thinking about sports than it was about physics. And even to this day, often after my kids go to bed, I'm watching the NBA, right? Like sports are just a huge part of my life. And physics is a huge part of my life. And I think that a lot of people are scared about physics, but a lot of people like sports. And so I view them as so closely connected that I like to take some strange situation that you might interact with, or that you might see in sports, and explain with physics why that might be the case. So for instance, like something I'm working on right now is if you watch a basketball game, you might notice that the tallest guy always does the jump ball, right? But the tallest guy is very rarely the person that can jump the highest. And so it's very easy to think, well, why would you have this tall dude who can barely jump? Why would you have him do the jump ball? Why not have the shorter person, the slightly shorter person who's got this amazing vertical leap? Why not have them do the jump ball? And there's some pretty straightforward physics behind that. So that's the kind of thing I'm working on. And so I think that I think physics can help us understand some things that seem strange in sports. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article on the new kickoff rule in the NFL, right? And the idea was the NFL. Now, I don't know this. I have not talked to the NFL, but what I'm saying is I think it has to be right. So I'm just going to posit that it is. I'm sure that they designed these kickoff rules so that they got more kick returns because those are exciting plays. But kick returns are also very dangerous. And so what they did is they designed the rules to get more kickoff returns, but then they also designed the subsequent parts of the rules to make it so that they can ensure as much safety as possible within those rules. And you can see from very sort of fundamental physics how they have designed safety into these rules. And so I wrote an article on that. So that's the kind of thing I like to do.
Speaking of outreach, you also started Science on Tap in Raleigh. Can you tell me some more about that?
Yeah, so I believe that people everywhere, but definitely people in Raleigh, are interested in learning about the cool stuff that we do at NC State in our different science disciplines. I also believe people in Raleigh really like good beer and they like good food. And so Science on Tap seemed like a very natural place or venue to try to put those things together. And so with a graduate student of mine named Ben Hines, Ben's has really been the driving force that's made this successful. We started this program where it's a monthly event at Linwood Brewing Concern. And the idea is we bring a scientist from NC State into Linwood to talk about their science in a way that is digestible and interesting for people that might be in the audience. And the target is not other scientists or other science students, but the target is just anybody in Raleigh that's curious about what the heck happens on our campus, maybe what the heck happens in these different science departments. Or maybe they might be asking, like, what were the effects of Hurricane Helene and how can we know about what happened and why it happened? Well, we had Professor Carl Wegman on to talk about some of that stuff. Or they may be wondering just why would you use a fish to try to understand ALS? Well, for that, we had Professor Kurt Marsden come and talk about why they use zebrafish to try to understand this stuff, why and how. So I think there's a lot of interest in this kind of stuff. I think people generally are curious. They don't want to get a major. They don't want to go to college and like spend 4 years studying this. But they are interested in coming, spending an hour, learning about cool stuff, learning that the things that are supported by public tax dollars are actually helpful for us, even if they're at the fundamental level that are not just yet translating into a cure, but understanding how the fundamental science can help inform the next step of the process of developing cures for these things or developing, hurricane resilience or whatever it is. You've got to start with fundamental stuff. And I think that people want to know about that, and I think our scientists can bring that to them in this kind of venue.
Absolutely. You were selected most recently for a Digital Science Communication Fellowship. What have you done as part of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So what had happened is for a long time, I've had in my mind something that ties in well with what I was just talking about with Science on Tap. The idea was to start a podcast or like a video series or something on the idea, what I call trickle-down science. And the idea is to take sort of storybook approach to looking at some very fundamental science that was funded by taxpayer dollars, where maybe you're doing something like trying to understand how the universe started, but always out of these things, this kind of fundamental research, scientists develop really new and innovative tools that a lot of times trickle down into society. So I applied for this fellowship with the idea being that I was going to use this as a venue to take the expertise that they were providing through the Boston Museum of Science, take that expertise in how to navigate the digital space and understand how to start this sort of podcast or video series and make my idea of trickle-down science come to life. So I applied and I got accepted and I was all excited. And then I had a phone call with one of the people that was organizing the fellowship. And he effectively told me in very nice words, "We hated your idea." But as part of this, I had to apply and provide a sort of resume that had some of the other things on it that I had done in the digital science communication products. And so I provided links to a video I had made that was called How to Hit a Home Run with a Princeton Physicist. And another one was called The Physics of a Curveball. And apparently they really liked that idea, and they thought that there is a space in the market for people to explain science through the lens of sports. And so that's how I got selected for this fellowship. I never in a million years would have pitched that as a proposal, but it seems like they were interested in that, and they have a lot of market research that shows that there's value there. So I thought, all right, seems cool. And these are things I like to do, so let's do it. And so what happened with that is we went to Boston for a convening of the fellowship, and there's a small number of mentees like myself, people who are interested in communicating science to a broader audience, but maybe don't know how to do it really well in the sort of on different social media platforms or on YouTube or whatever it is in the different digital environments. So they took people like us and they've matched them with professional content creators, people that make digital content that is very well received and very well followed. And those people they call mentors. And so they match each one of the mentees with a mentor, and that mentor is helping all of the mentees. My mentor is helping me get better at telling my story, in a way that's compelling, finding better ways to communicate the things that I want to communicate in a way that's more engaging for somebody that doesn't necessarily have the attention span to watch some long form video, or, in a environment where there's a lot of competition and people are constantly scrolling. How do you get your message across efficiently so that people are interested in what you're doing? So with that, after we met in person, we have regular meetings where I'm working with my mentor to refine different things that I'm doing and different content that I'm making and developing. Given what they had told me from their market research is like, everything that I'm doing is in this space is around sports science. Just trying to explain how, even though sports is awesome, which I totally agree with, there is a lot of science there, and we can use sports as an avenue to understand and explore science.
Would you say that baseball is your favorite sport?
That's a good question. Baseball, when I was growing up, baseball was absolutely my favorite sport. It's like kind of what I sort of ate, slept, breathed. Over the years, I think basketball, my interests have morphed a little bit, and I think basketball is now my favorite sport. There's a number of reasons for that. Basketball is a little easier to find a game in. As an adult, it's very hard to find a baseball game, right? It requires 18 people as opposed to basketball. You can play with 4. And so I think as my level of participation has gone from playing a lot more baseball than anything else to now I play a lot more basketball than anything else. I think also the sports that I follow have migrated similarly. And so I would say basketball is now my favorite sport, but baseball will always be a passion for me. It'll always have a special place in my heart. Baseball also, in terms of like doing physics and using physics to understand it clearly and easily, baseball is very straightforward in a way that basketball is not necessarily. Baseball is really the fundamental interaction in baseball is between the pitcher and the batter, and it's just a one-on-one event. Whereas in basketball, you've constantly got 5 people from each team it's kind of like physics is fundamental and we try to narrow things down to one thing, whereas biology is this nasty, soupy web of all kinds of different things interacting. It's kind of like that with baseball and basketball. Baseball is just this fundamental interaction. There are these other players in the background. Whereas basketball, you've constantly got this web of people moving around, and both are beautiful and interesting in different ways.
Lots of interactions in basketball.
Yeah, for sure.
As a professor in science, what advice would you give students or your 20-year-old self?
The advice I would give my 20-year-old self was be more serious about school and spend less time on the basketball court. I think for me, when I was 20, I went through classes feeling like they were a thing that I needed to check off. And like, okay, if I get this class done and I get this homework done, then that's all I need to do. And that's not the case, right? Like a professor thinks that when a student is doing work, they're engaged in this and they're thinking about it and they're thinking about the nuance of the homework assignment or the nuance of the content that's being covered. Whereas when I was 20, I was literally just being like, okay, I'm taking this in. What do I need to do to get this homework done? What do I need to do to get this grade on this test? And that meant that I really missed out on an opportunity to really think deeply about this subject when that's what I was supposed to be doing. What I was thinking deeply about, like at that time, was literally like, okay, when can I get to the basketball court? And so it's not that I think you need to put those sports or that I should have put those sports aside or anything. It's more just like I should have been more focused on really thinking about and understanding the nuance of the courses that I was taking. Now as a much older person, like I actually love all the stuff that I was forced to take in all these classes. Like I love learning about history and philosophy and economics. Whereas when I was a student, it was literally like a box I had to check to get out the door. And I paid money to do that in my tuition. And what I was paying money for was the opportunity to learn this from experts. But back then, what I viewed it as is I am paying money to get a degree. And that was not the right view. It really meant that I missed an opportunity to learn a lot more and have a much richer understanding of like more or less everything that humanity knows.
That's good advice. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss that I didn't ask about, or any misconceptions about your field you want to clear up?
the one thing that I would say about physics is when I tell somebody I'm a physicist, I get two responses. One of the responses is, oh, that's super cool. And then they ask me some random question that is typically ill-conceived and it's about black holes or the beginning of the universe. That's cool. I love it, and I will talk to those people, Of those two reactions, that first one is definitely the one that comes the least. The second reaction that I get is, physics is really hard. I hated that class. How's the weather? And, it's like more or less they give me the sort of, how do I find my way out of this conversation as fast as possible? And I guess what I would like to say is physics and math are distinct and separate subjects for a reason, because they are different, right? Physics is really about understanding the universe or understanding how different things work. We use math as a model to understand and get a deeper understanding and intuition for these things. But if you care about how anything works or how the universe came to be or how different quantum devices can be manufactured, that's physics. And you can understand a lot of that stuff without that much math. And so I think that's really cool and powerful. And I think that if you're interested in that stuff, you should explore it and don't be turned off by a crazy amount of math. Because if that is the explanation you're getting, then you can look somewhere else and you can find a better explanation that can give you some intuition for these things without all the math.
It's time for the Breyton Interrogation. So this is...
I am buckled up and ready to go.
Yes, a list of questions that I ask to get to know you rather than what you do. So number 1, what's in the best sandwich?
What's in the best sandwich? I think the best sandwich is the sandwich that is in front of me, because I'm pretty much like most things. I really, really love like a buffalo chicken sandwich. I mentioned that I worked for a year in Philadelphia. Like an awesome Philly cheesesteak is like, there's nothing like it. But I also love just like a roast beef sandwich with some Swiss, some mayonnaise, lettuce, and onion. Yeah, I don't know. That's the toughest question you've asked.
It's a hard question.
It's a good question.
All right, what's one little thing that could ruin your day?
The honest answer is if my kids are are fighting, because that can be just like a spiral at our house of just like them just running around, like yelling at each other and chasing the dog, So that's one thing. I guess another thing that can ruin my day, if I'm being frank, as a professor, is email. I get so many emails and I feel obligated to respond to most of them. Yet it is not the reason I took any job I will ever have, but it is a huge part of every job. And it's when I have to sit down and just respond to a bunch of emails, that will ruin my day.
Exhausting. Yeah. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Recently, before I went to Boston for this fellowship, in advance of the meeting, part of this fellowship is trying to help people find who they are themselves. And so they gave us one of these questionnaires that are the kinds of things you would take on a personality survey or something. And so they had all these funny questions. As I was filling it out, I thought, hey, this would actually be fun to do for my wife. And, so I answer it for me, I answer it for her, and then she does that as well. And so we, started talking about these things and, talking about, what is your personality traits and whatever. And one of the things that my wife said about me was, I can't remember if she admired it or hated it, but what she said was that she is constantly amazed at how it is impossible for me to be embarrassed. And she didn't mean that as a compliment, but I actually took it as a compliment because I honestly feel like I'm pretty much always I try to be myself no matter where I am. And, whether it's like, when I was at Princeton, I constantly interacted with Nobel Prize winners, or when I'm at home, I'm interacting with a 2-year-old, or when I'm in my own department, I'm interacting with my colleagues. I really try, my philosophy is I don't care who you are. I'm Kasey and you're going to get me, like it or not. And, so when she said that to me, I read it as, yeah, I'm not going to be embarrassed, even if I'm in a highfalutin situation. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that I don't know something or that, oh yeah, I've got mustard on my shirt because my 5-year-old wiped her dirty hands all over me.
If the world was split into dancers and not dancers, where do you fall?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm going to give you two answers based on two interpretations of this question. If you are splitting the world into people who can dance and people who cannot dance, I am firmly in the I cannot dance split. If you are splitting the world into people who will dance and people who will not dance, I am firmly in the will dance. So I'm very happy to dance. I don't know how to dance. And so I think this plays into, my wife's concept of I am unafraid of being embarrassed.
I agree with you there. I'm bad dancers, but I will dance. Do you have a no-skip album? If so, what is it?
There are 3 albums that kind of come to mind. One of them is by the band Iron and Wine, named The Creek Drank the Cradle. It's just, I could always listen to that, but it is very much a very particular album that most people, when I'm with, will skip right away. Another one is by a guy named Josh Ritter, and it's called Hello Starling. It just brings me back to a very specific time in my life that was just very rich. And then the other one is actually another album by Iron and Wine called Kiss Each Other Clean, which is just a complete, in my mind, is very, very different than the other Iron and Wine album I mentioned. Those are the things that come to mind.
Going off of vibes alone, do you feel like you're more rock, paper, or scissors?
Yeah, I would say that I'd put myself in paper.
Solid. All right, last question here. Describe the rest of your life in 5 words.
Eventful, unpredictable, fun, rich, and active.
There you have it, folks. This has been Dr. Kasey Wagoner, and you're listening to WKNC.
This has been Eye on the Triangle from WKNC 88.1 FM HD1 Raleigh. Our theme song is Krakatoa by Noah Stark. Licensed under Creative Commons. To re-listen to this or any other episode, visit wknc.org/podcast or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening.